Welcome to True Crime Never Sleeps podcast. I'm your host, Larry Lease. And on today's episode, we're diving into Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, one of the most infamous Russian spies. But first, we'd like to thank our sponsor, Poddex, for sponsoring this episode. Poddex are unique interview questions and episode starting prompts in the palm of your hand. Whether you're a new podcaster or existing broadcaster looking to grow your audience or get more engagement, you're going to want to check out poddex.com. Use promo code Larry21 for 10% off your order. Now let's get into today's topic. Julius Rosenberg and Ethel Rosenberg were American citizens who were convicted of spying on behalf of the Soviet Union. The couple were convicted of providing top-secret information about radar, sonar, jet propulsion engines, and valuable nuclear weapon designs. Convicted of espionage in 1951, they were executed by the federal government of the United States in 1953 at Sing Sing Correctional Facility in New York, becoming the first American civilians to be executed for such charges and the first to receive that penalty during peacetime. Other convicted co-conspirators were sentenced to prison, including Ethel's brother David Greenglass, who made a plea agreement, Harry Gold, Morton Sobel, Klaus Fuchs, apologies for saying these names wrong, a German scientist working in Los Alamos, was convicted in the UK. After the fall of the Soviet Union, much information concerning them was declassified, including a trove of decoded Soviet cables, which detailed Julius's role as a courier and recruiter for the Soviets. Ethel's role was an accessory who helped recruit her brother David into the spy ring and did clerical tasks, such as typing up documents that Julius passed to the Soviets. In 2008, the National Archives published most of the grand jury testimony related to the prosecution of the Rosenbergs. For decades, the Rosenberg sons and others had maintained that Julius and Ethel were innocent of spying on their country and were victims of Cold War paranoia. Not until the above-referenced documents were released after the fall of the Soviet Union did the extent of their crimes come to light. Well, let's talk about their early lives and their education. Julius Rosenberg was born on May 12, 1918 in New York City to a family of Jewish immigrants from the Russian Empire. The family moved to the Lower East Side by the time Julius was 11. His parents worked in the shops of the Lower East Side as Julius attended Seward Park High School. Julius became a leader in the Young Communist League USA while at City College of New York during the Great Depression. In 1939, he graduated from City College of New York with a degree in electrical engineering. Ethel Greenglass, was born on September 28, 1915, to a Jewish family in Manhattan, New York City. She had a brother, David Greenglass. She originally was an aspiring actress and singer, but eventually took a secretarial job at a shipping company. She became involved in labor disputes and joined the Young Communist League, where she met Julius in 1936. They married in 1939. And now let's dive into their espionage background. Julius Rosenberg joined the Army Signal Corps Engineering Laboratories at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey in 1940, where he worked as an engineer inspector until 1945. He was discharged when the U.S. Army discovered his previous membership in the Communist Party. Important research on electronics, communications, radar, and guided missile controls was undertaken at Fort Monmouth during World War II. According to a 2001 book by his former handler, Alexander Feklisov, Rosenberg was originally recruited to spy for the Interior Ministry of the Soviet Union by former spy master Semyon Semenov. By this time, following the invasion of Nazi Germany in June 1941, the Soviet Union had become an ally of the Western powers, which included the United States. After Pearl Harbor, Rosenberg had been introduced to Semenov by Bernard Schuster, a high-ranking member of the Communist Party USA, an NKVD liaison for Earl Browder. After Semenov was recalled to Moscow in 1944, his duties were taken over by Feklisov. Rosenberg provided thousands of classified reports from Emerson Radio, including a complete proximity fuse. Under supervision, Rosenberg recruited sympathetic individuals into NKVD service, including Joel Barr, Alfred Serant, William Pearl, and Morton Sobel, also an engineer. Pearl supplied Feklisov under Rosenberg's direction with thousands of documents from the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, including a complete set of design and production drawings for Lockheed's P-80 Shooting Star, the first U.S. operational jet fighter. They learned through Rosenberg that Ethel's brother David Greenglass was working on a top-secret Manhattan project at the Los Alamos National Laboratory. He directed Julius to recruit Greenglass. In February 1944, Rosenberg succeeded in recruiting his second source of Manhattan Project information, engineer Russell McNutt, who worked on designs for the plant at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. For this success, Rosenberg received a $100 bonus. McNutt's employment provided access to secrets about processes for manufacturing weapons-grade uranium. The USSR and the US were allies during World War II, but the Americans did not share information with or seek assistance from the Soviet Union regarding the Manhattan Project. The West was shocked by the speed with which the Soviets were able to stage their first nuclear test, Joe 1, on August 29, 1949. However, the head of the Soviet nuclear project, Lavrentiy Beria, used foreign intelligence, which he did not trust by default, only as a third-party check, rather than giving it directly to the design teams, who he did not clear to know about the espionage efforts, and the development was indigenous considering that the pace of the Soviet program was set primarily by the amount of uranium that it could procure. It is difficult for scholars to judge accurately how much time was saved, if any. And now on to the arrest of the couple. In January 1950, the U.S. discovered that German refugee theoretical physicist Klaus Fuchs, can't say his name right, working for the British mission in the Manhattan Project, had given key documents to the Soviets throughout the war. He identified his courier as American Harry Gold, who was arrested on May 23, 1950. On June 15, 1950, David Greenglass was arrested by the FBI for espionage and soon confessed to having passed secret information onto the USSR. He also claimed that his sister Ethel's husband, Julius Rosenberg, had convinced David's wife, Ruth, to recruit him while visiting him in Albuquerque, New Mexico in 1944. He said Julius had passed secrets and thus linked him to the Soviet contact Anatoly Yakovlev. This connection would be necessary as evidence if there was to be a conviction for espionage of the Rosenbergs. On July 17, 1950, Julius Rosenberg was arrested on suspicion of espionage, based on David Greenglass's confession. On August 11, 1950, Ethel Rosenberg was arrested after testifying before a grand jury. Another conspirator, Morton Sobel, fled with his family to Mexico City after Greenglass was arrested. They took assumed names and he tried to figure out a way to reach Europe without a passport. Abandoning that effort, he returned to Mexico City. He claimed that he was kidnapped by members of the Mexican secret police and driven to the U.S. border, where he was arrested by U.S. forces. The U.S. government claimed Morton Sobel was arrested by the Mexican police for bank robbery on August 16, 1950, and extradited to the U.S. in Laredo, Texas. 20 senior government officials met secretly on February 8, 1950, to discuss the Rosenberg case. Gordon Dean, the chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission, said, quote, "It looks as though Rosenberg is the kingpin of a very large ring, and if there is any way of breaking him by having the shadow of a death penalty over him, we want to do it." Miles Lane, a member of the prosecution team, said that the case against Ethel was not too strong, but that it was very important that she be convicted too and given a stiff sentence. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover wrote, quote, "Proceeding against the wife will serve as a lever to make Julius talk." Their case against Ethel Rosenberg was resolved 10 days before the start of the trial. When David and Ruth Greenglass were interviewed a second time, they were persuaded to change their original stories. David originally had said that he had passed the atomic data he had collected to Julius on a New York street corner. After being interviewed the second time, he said that he had given this information to Julius in the living room of the Rosenbergs' New York apartment. Ethel, at Julius's request, had taken his notes and typed them up. In her re-interview, Ruth Greenglass expanded on her husband's version, saying, Julius then took the info into the bathroom and read it, and when he came out, he called Ethel and told her she had to type this information immediately. Ethel then sat down at the typewriter, which she placed on a bridge table in the living room, proceeded to type the information that David had given to Julius. As a result of this new testimony, all charges against Ruth Greenglass were dropped. On August 11th, Ethel Rosenberg testified before a grand jury. For all questions, she asserted her right to not answer as provided by the U.S. Constitution's Fifth Amendment against self-incrimination. FBI agents took her into custody as she left the courthouse. Her attorney asked the U.S. Commissioner to parole her in his custody over the weekend so that she could make arrangements for her two young children. The request was denied. Julius and Ethel were put under pressure to incriminate others involved in the spy ring. Neither offered any further information. On August 17th, the grand jury returned an indictment alleging 11 overt acts. Both Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were indicted, as were David Greenglass and Anatoly Yakovlev. The trial of the Rosenbergs and Sobel on federal espionage charges began on March 6, 1951, in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York. Judge Irving Kaufman presided over the trial, with Assistant U.S. Attorney Irving Sapel leading the prosecution and criminal defense lawyer Emmanuel Block representing the Rosenbergs. The prosecution's primary witness, David Greenglass, said that he turned over to Julius Rosenberg a sketch of the cross-section of an implosion-type atom bomb. This was the fat bomb dropped on Nagasaki, Japan, as opposed to a bomb with the gun method triggering device used in the little boy bomb dropped on Hiroshima. On March 29, 1951, the Rosenbergs were convicted of espionage. They were sentenced to death on April 5th under Section 2 of the Espionage Act of 1917, which provides that anyone convicted of transmitting or attempting to transmit to a foreign government information relating to the national defense may be imprisoned for life or put to death. Prosecutor Ray Cohn later claimed that his influence led to both Kaufman and Sapel being appointed to the Rosenberg case, and that Kaufman imposed the death penalty based on Cohn's personal recommendation. He would go on to later work for Senator Joseph McCarthy, appointed as chief counsel to the Investigation Subcommittee during McCarthy's tenure as chairman of the Senate Government Operations Committee. In opposing the death penalty, Kaufman noted that he held the Rosenbergs responsible not only for espionage, but also for American deaths in the Korean War. The U.S. government offered to spare the lives of both Julius and Ethel if Julius provided the names of other spies, and they admitted their guilt. The Rosenbergs made a public statement, quote, by asking us to repudiate the truth of our innocence, the government admits its own doubts concerning our guilt. We will not be coerced, even under pain of death, to bear false witness. And now we're going to take a look following their conviction. After the publication of an investigative series in the National Guardian and the formation of the National Committee to Secure Justice in the Rosenberg case, some Americans came to believe both Rosenbergs were innocent or had received too harsh a sentence, particularly Ethel. A campaign was started to try to prevent the couple's execution. Between the trial and the executions, there were widespread protests and claims of anti-Semitism. The charges of anti-Semitism were widely believed abroad, but not among the vast majority in the U.S. At a time when American fears about communism were high, the Rosenbergs did not receive support from mainstream Jewish organizations. The ACLU refused to acknowledge any violations of civil liberties in the case. Across the world, especially in Western European capitals, there were numerous protests with picketing and demonstrations in favor of the Rosenbergs, along with editorials in otherwise pro-American newspapers and a plea for clemency from the Pope. President Eisenhower, supported by public opinion and the media at home, ignored the overseas demands. The execution was delayed from the originally scheduled date of June 18th because Supreme Court Associate Justice William Douglas granted a stay of execution on the previous day. That stay resulted from an intervention in the case by Fike Farmer, a Tennessee lawyer whose efforts had previously been scorned by the Rosenberg's attorney, Emanuel Block. The execution was scheduled for 11 p.m. that evening during the Sabbath, which begins and ends around sunset. Block asked for more time, filing a complaint that execution on the Sabbath offended the defendant's Jewish heritage. Rhoda Lax, another attorney on the Rosenberg's defense team, also made this argument before Judge Kaufman. The defense's strategy backfired. Kaufman, who also stated his concerns about executing the Rosenbergs on the Sabbath, rescheduled the execution for 8 p.m. before sunset, and the Sabbath, the regular time for executions at Sing Sing. On June 19, 1953, Julius died of the first electric shock. Ethel's execution did not go smoothly. After she was given the normal course of 3 electric shocks, attendants removed the strapping and other equipment, only to have doctors determine that Ethel's heart was still beating. 2 more electric shocks were applied, and at the conclusion, eyewitnesses reported that smoke rose from her head. Funeral services were held in Brooklyn on June 21st. Ethel and Julius Rosenberg were buried at Wellwood Cemetery in Pine Lawn, New York. According to the Times, 500 people attended, while some 10,000 stood outside. The Rosenbergs were the only American civilians executed for espionage during the Cold War. And that is all we have for this episode of the True Crime Never Sleeps podcast. Let us know your thoughts on Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. Do you think they were innocent, or are they guilty of their crimes? Let us know in the comment section below. Give us a thumbs up if you liked the video. And if you want to support the show, you can buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/TCNS. Your support helps the channel grow. We can upgrade our equipment, bring in new hosts, and hopefully take this show on the road one of these days. Thank you so much for watching and listening. We'll see you next time.